Hola, everyone. Welcome back to First Gen Healing, a podcast on Latinx healing and awakening journeys. My name is Priscilla Luna. I am your host. We're back to recording with guests, and it's a fellow Latina who has a lot of good information to share with us today. But of course, first in part one, we want to hear about her story. So, hola, Yvonne. ¿Cómo estás?
Hola, muy bien. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to chat and connect with you and everybody that tunes in.
To start off, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your cultura, your background. We like to start from the root, from the raíz.
Yes. Born and raised in San Francisco, California. And I like to say I'm super proud of the fact that I still have a 415 area code number. If you know, you know. I'm pretty sure they ran out of the 415. So it just makes me feel like, yep, I was born and raised in San Francisco, and that's proof right there. My mom is from Mexico, and my dad is too. My mom is from Guanajuato, and my dad is from the city of Mexico. He's a Chilango. So I grew up going to Mexico. You know, I'm sure you have engaged in conversations around, am I Mexican? Am I Mexican American? Like, which one am I? I have always been really tied to my cultura. When I was younger, couldn't go to Mexico, so she would send my brother and I for entire summers just to hang out with the family, take pictures, send ropa, mandar dinero, send money over, all that kind of stuff. So I grew up going to Mexico and would stay out there for long periods of time. Specifically Guanajuato, Tarimoro, Guanajuato. And so I have really fond memories of all of my time in Mexico. Yeah. And I'm the oldest of three, so I have a younger brother who is 3 years younger than me and a sister who's 10 years younger than me. So I'm the oldest. Grew up with my mom and I being really great partners, I would say. My mom was a single mom growing up, so I like to think that for better or for worse, I kind of was a second mom to my siblings. I don't think they enjoy that as much, but I'm sort of proud of it.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So 2 siblings. And then I think you mentioned your mom is or was a single mom growing up, right?
She was, yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm assuming that kind of placed even more weight on your shoulders, potentially, right? On like being that second parent. How did you experience that growing up? Was it something you were conscious of, or was it something that you maybe came into consciousness now that you're older?
I think part of me might have been conscious about it. There were a lot of, I don't think I've ever said this out loud really, but when I was living through that, right? Like my sister was maybe 3, I was still in elementary or about to enter middle school, I think. And I was like changing her diapers, waking up at 3 a.m. because she wanted a bottle, like that kind of stuff. And then waking up and going to school early, right? Part of it felt like it was just a normal thing. Like this is just the way that my life is. And I didn't really necessarily think about my life in relation to everybody else's, right? It was almost like at home, this was me. And then when I went to school, that was the version of me that could be a kid. And I clung on to that so much. Like I remember even when I was sick, I still wanted to go to school. When I would get really bad nosebleeds and as a result get migraines to the point where I couldn't move, right? Like I couldn't go to school, but I would cry because I wanted to go to school. I was like, no, send me, Mom, I want to go to school. And now that I think and look back on it, it's probably because I think school was the one place where I felt like, okay, there's expectations of me about, being a good student and doing my homework and all of that. But I have a recess, I have a break, I have some friends, and, it just felt very separate in that way. So I have always thought of my personal and family life as being very separate to who I am and how I show up in all these other spaces. And I think that's impacted the way that I show up now. A lot of people talk about authenticity and how do you remain authentic in these spaces? Well, on top of a layer of being, for the past couple years, I've been in the tech industry. And if you're familiar with the tech industry, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a hot topic, right? And for me, I'm like, there's such a difference in who I am there, not only because of the people that I'm surrounded with and oftentimes a lack of representation, but also because I still very much hold on to that separation of family, home life, and work, career, friends. It's just, it was almost a way of protecting what was happening at home and what was my home.
You brought back a memory that I don't think I had thought about that. So my mom was a teacher. And so she actually taught at the same school that I went to in elementary. And so in recess and like after school and before school, I would help her with making copies and grading papers. So I'm just thinking like, dang, I don't think I got that separation like you did, you know, where it's like I get to be a kid here maybe, but at home it's a little bit different. But I will say I didn't change diapers and do that kind of stuff. So maybe that was the
good.
Yeah.
Because it's so funny. Now I'm the total opposite. I'm like, I used to love kids. I used to be like, oh, I mean, not that I don't love kids, right? But now I'm like, I'm not trying to change no diapers. I don't want to take care of no kid right now. Like, I'm good.
Yeah, you've already done that. Oh my gosh, we've talked about that in the podcast because it's another topic, but like Latinas and maybe not wanting to mother because they were in a way parentified growing up. But then I love what you mentioned about authenticity because I was listening to one of your more recent episodes because you have a podcast también.
Yes.
And you can plug it. What's the name?
Chats with Yvonne. It's just
Chats with Yvonne.
Yeah.
And I was hearing, it was like your 2023 reflections about how you don't necessarily, or sometimes we consider like putting on a persona, but it's really us and we don't have to create that division, which I thought was like an interesting concept, you know, because I think that part of my, let's say, healing and leaving corporate is reclaiming the parts of me that I felt like I let go of in those spaces. But I like that idea. They're like, well, maybe it's a different version of me. I didn't show up fully, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't me as well, you know?
Yeah. And I think it's also, it's that to me has been a really important realization or just reflection in my own life because on my platforms, right, I talk a lot about the fact that I'm an introvert and I've never led with that necessarily because I've been in spaces where being an extrovert, being louder, being bolder is always seen as the more the better option. And for better or for worse, in my career, in my social personal life, like I've always felt like I need to live up to that and be bolder, be louder, right? And so to some extent, you know, in the corporate space, I've always attempted to push myself. I'm like, okay, I'm going to raise my hand and say this, and I am going to wear this outfit and do that, right? And not that that wasn't part of who I was, but I knew that I was trying to make up for the fact that I thought being more reserved and an introvert was not a good thing, right? And so now it's about not only reclaiming the parts of myself that I let go, but almost amplifying the parts of me that actually are me, right? And not saying that that wasn't me, because I think to some extent they are now, right? They form part of who I am and how I move in the world. But it's been a really nice realization to think, okay, I wasn't being fake. That wasn't a fake version of me. It was just a version of me that I needed for myself to feel comfortable in this unknown space.
And, you know, I like that because, I mean, you know, this podcast is about healing and awakening. And a big part of healing, I think, is not rejecting those parts of us that we no longer resonate with or embody, but instead like accepting them. So in a sense, I love the reframe that you gave it, because I was like, you know, in the past, like I mentioned, it was more like that wasn't me, like here's me and I want to show up more fully. But I love actually accepting like that's who I needed to be to survive, essentially, right? And to be what I needed. And it's also a lesson, like it gave you contrast to like, okay, maybe that doesn't fully feel like me. What does, right? And you need to go through that to find the other.
Yeah. And it's hard when you think that people now expect you to show up in a certain way, but you show up differently, right? And the example of introversion versus extroversion, that's a very, you know, attaching labels to it. We're all made up of we're complex human beings, right? So I'm simplifying it a lot, but there are spaces where I show up more boldly, not because it's fake or it's not being me, but it's just like, okay, this is what it's calling for, right? But then I also think sometimes for me specifically, my healing around accepting that I am more reserved, that I am not always going to be the loudest or the most energetic is realizing like, there are other people that expect the expectations, right? Sometimes that's the hardest. It's like, well, they've already seen me at my energetic. They've already seen me. They expect me to be this way because of the things that I have already done or said to them, right? it's almost like the world still hasn't caught up to the fact that I can be quiet, I can be more reserved, but then when I go on stage, you might see a different version of Yvonne, and that's okay too.
Yeah. Well, maybe bringing it back to your childhood a little bit. Where do you think you were? Do you feel like you were introverted in both spaces, knowing that you had to embody kind of a parental role, or do you feel like you like kind of amplified a more outspoken version of you being a parent figure? Like, where do you think you were, let's say, growing up?
Yeah, it's so funny because definitely at school, in social settings, always more reserved, more of the introvert.
Okay.
In las fiestas, right? I was the kid that had sitting in the corner, had a book. At the time, I remember I was learning how to crochet. So I had my little crochet. I had yarns and yarns of crochet, and I would just sit there, right? While everybody was partying, I would do that. And everybody would always be like, oh, es bien callada tu hija, casi no habla, like trying to get me to talk. And I just wouldn't talk. Like I didn't want to. It was a lot of energy to exude, right? But growing up, when I was at home, because oftentimes it was me and my siblings by ourselves, I was loud. I was like, no, go do this. Go. Like I almost transformed, right? And it's interesting because even now, I think in my family, I do tend to be the louder one. It's almost like I feel like I'm not the entertainer, but to some extent, I'm like, I kind of have to be present. Like I have to be present and let my presence be known type of thing, if that makes sense. I don't know why that is, but even today, like I still feel like, okay, my siblings, I got to ask what they're up to, what they're doing. I have to give them my opinions, you know. Even and sometimes I have to be like, okay, Yvonne, chill for a little bit. You really aren't their parent.
Yeah. I wonder if it has to do with being the eldest and like being parentified. You're kind of like a not event coordinator, but like when there is more people. It's kind of like, how's everyone doing? How's mom doing? How, you know, like, and so likely that's the part of you that's kind of catering to like the audiences, let's say, in that setting, you know?
Exactly. Yes. It's like, it's so funny that you say that because I'm a public speaker, right? And you learn that everything is around catering to your audience. And that's literally how whether it's for better or for worse, it's how I walk through life, right? It's like, how can I cater to the audience that's in front of me? And a lot of me is learning to understand myself within that and being like, well, actually, you know what? It's not always about your audience. How much, or it's a balance, right? It's like, yes, this is your audience. You care deeply about them. But at the same time, who are you and where do you stand within it? And I'm healing my people-pleasing tendencies too, but so it's so funny that you said that, you know, your audience.
I would love to know what you resonate with most, healing or awakening, and then when do you feel like was the first instance where you started to realize, oh, like there's something to heal or there's an awakening happening?
I don't know that I have one moment where I was like, oh, I'm healing and awakening, but I think the one that I resonate the most with, and only because I feel like it's the easier one for me to do, is the awakening part. Like, I feel like from a very young age, I've always been very observant. It's in my nature, right, as an introvert to be really observant. And so because of that, I feel like I pick up on things. I pick up on people's cues, the cues that they give me. I respond to that well. And so being able to have all these pieces of information about others has allowed me to see pieces of information about myself that have led me to a better understanding of who I am and who I want to be. But the healing part is the part where sometimes I get stuck on it, right? Because there's so much of me that wants to just like, it happened, it's fine, it is what it is, let me just keep moving forward. I think that when I think about, was there a moment, I can't pinpoint one, but I do think that when I went off to college, and I'm from the Bay Area. At the time, my family lived in San Leandro, California, for those of y'all that are familiar with it. And I went to school at UC Berkeley, California. If you know, it's literally no more than like a 20-minute drive, and with traffic, maybe a little bit more. But I didn't have a car. I didn't necessarily go home often. And I realized it was because I loved my independence, right? I loved, not only was I busy, but I almost made myself busy. I was like, oh, I had 2 jobs and an internship. I joined this club, right? But to some extent, I was like, well, I just don't have time to go home. But I realized this is what it's like for me to feel independent, to know that I am staying up late and it's not, the lights aren't bugging anybody else in the room. Like little things like that, right? Or I get to wake up in the morning and only hear the sound of my voice. And again, not to say that it bugs me to hear anybody else's really, but I remember, especially when I moved in by myself, I was like, wow, quiet. Like I get to just sit with my own thoughts. And I just realized I became more in tune with the fact that I have always been independent, but that has meant me doing things on my own. It's meant me not asking for help. Whereas this form of independence that I was feeling came more from, wow, I really love and enjoy doing things on my own. And I've never experienced being able to be on my own and be alone, be not lonely, but just alone in my own space. And I think that's what really led me to being like, it is more about me, right? I can't say that I'm completely, cured from all my people pleasing tendencies and all of that, but it's like a lot of my life is also more about me now. And I love that and I enjoy it.
Super cool. So you lived on campus, it sounds like, or in an apartment.
My first semester, I messed up. I accepted like loans on accident because I didn't know what I was doing. I missed the application for housing on campus. So for the first semester, I was commuting back and forth from classes, and I would take like a 2-hour long bus drive to save money and whatever. But my second semester, I was like, I got to get it together because I can't do this, right? So I learned more things, and then I lived on campus the rest of my college career.
Okay, I see. I think like that subject is really, or that topic is really important because I think since Latinos tend to be so like family oriented, they view being alone as something sad. I wonder if you've gotten that before, right? Like they don't necessarily understand it as something to be happy about and enjoy. And as someone who also, like, I lived in my own apartment for like 8 years or something like that. Like everyone was like, ay, qué triste, pobrecita, no tienes a nadie. And I'm like, if you only knew how much I enjoy it, So can you tell me about that? Like even embracing that can sometimes maybe be like a journey of its own,
Yeah, well, it's super interesting because, I mentioned my mom was a single mom, right? She's also the youngest of 7. All of her siblings are way older than her. Las mujeres están casadas and they're married to the men that they've been married to since they were like really young. My mom didn't get married to my dad. My mom was always the rebel of the family because she was the youngest. She came to the US when she was 15. My grandma told her, don't do it. And she came anyway and she figured it out. And so it's interesting because I've never felt this tension around wanting or needing to be independent from my mom in particular.
Okay.
And in not in explicit ways, not in the ways that I felt it from other people, like from my tías, right? Like, oh, pero ¿qué vas a hacer sola? ¿Qué vas a comer? Blah, blah, blah. Because I think my mom, to some extent, is also like, well, I was the rebel of my family. Like, I did what I wanted to do. You guys go do your thing. So when I graduated from college, my intention was to move, went back home. The pandemic happened. And then I was like, well, I'm not going anywhere. I'm just going to stay here until I can, until it makes sense to live somewhere else. And then I finally moved, maybe 2 years or something. I was at home. And everybody around my mom was asking her, ¿qué pasó? ¿Se pelearon? ¿Por qué se movió? ¿Ya no estaba a gusto? Like, blah, blah, blah. And my mom was like, no, she's just a person. She's a grown adult that needs to go and make her own life happen, right? And so I've never felt this. I think I've felt the attachment to my family more so now. Like when we were younger, it was very much like they can't function without me, right? Now it's almost like we're adults now. I mean, my brother is 20? How old am I? Yeah, my brother's like 24. And my sister is off to college now too. My mom's she's married, has 2 dogs to keep her busy. It's just kind of a different dynamic. And I think for a really long time, I was holding on to the version of my family that existed when we were younger. Like
Yeah.
We do everything together. My brother needs me. My mom is working night shifts, so I have to take care of my brother, make sure he does his homework, right? Or oh, now my mom is working the night shift and has to go to the morning shift. So we have to be at school and hang out together early in the morning. It was just like, I think for a really long time, I was holding on to that version of what my family dynamic had been, that when I moved
Yeah.
out, I was initially really scared about leaving. I felt like I was leaving my family, and that was really hard for me. But again, I think the first week, I was like, wow, this is so nice. And then knowing that my family too was okay. Like, they're okay without me. Like, I do not need to be there, type of thing.
Yeah. That's so important, right? Because the flip side of it could be like your mom calling you constantly or making you feel guilty, or like, now who's going to help me with A, B, and C, So I
See,
think
see.
that, yeah.
Yeah. And, I mean, I am really lucky now in that my mom, when I turned, I think around the time when I was going to college, she started going to therapy, right? She started doing work on herself and so like a lot of things I think she's aware of, right? She knows, even if she would love to, she
Mm,
probably knows not to call me complaining about something my brother did, which is kind of the
yeah.
dynamic. I think when we were at home, I would get annoyed at my brother because I was like, why are you doing that to my mom? Like, all this stuff. Or,
Yeah.
oh my God, why aren't you washing your dish? I'm like, I didn't need, that was something that I was like, I need to not do that. I'm not the parent. We're each grown adults, So my mom, I think, um, because she's done the work on her own, we're in a lot better place.
That is amazing. That makes me happy to hear.
Yeah.
Usually, who I bring on, like that's not necessarily the case. So it sounds like it's such a different experience when that happens on both ends, because then it changes the dynamic without all of the friction maybe that can happen.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I think my mom started living an adult life really early on too, right? And
Yeah.
for a really long time, I was like, dude, why couldn't my mom just like not be a single mom, and like I wouldn't have to be doing all this
Mm,
stuff. I was like annoyed at it. But once you get old, once I got older, I started to see it more as like women have a hard time in this, like no matter what, right? It's just hard out here. And my mom went through a lot of things, and we as a family unit went through a lot of things that I think prompted her to say, oh yeah, I should probably go to therapy. And so I think the years of therapy and self-work really really helped and transformed our like entire family dynamic. I mean, we're
yeah.
not perfect, right? Nobody is really, but
Yeah. No, but there's at least like awareness and potentially like an intention of not causing additional, let's say, trauma or harm, right? Like
see.
at least there's maybe some, yeah, I think awareness is big because even that doesn't necessarily exist in a lot of households. So, like with a lot of parental figures. I think you said awakening is easier to lean into and then healing is a bit harder. What do you think is maybe that? Because I think like usually our journeys have themes. Would you say like introvert versus extrovert is like the theme and like fully accepting who you are? Is it people pleasing? Like where do you see yourself like kind of coming back to a similar lesson?
So I have been in internal communications for a really long time, and hear me out, but in marketing they teach you, right, to capture your audience, to do all this stuff, you have to have a niche, right? You have to figure out what that niche is, and you have to do it and do it often, consistently, because that's what you're going to be known for, right? And I think a lot of my existence has been a lot of duality, where I'm like, yes, I'm an introvert, and right, like now I've learned I'm more of a social introvert, where I do actually love the engaging and talking to people, but I still need 4 to 5 business days afterwards to recover from it, right? And so I think the
Yeah.
theme of my life is being able to exist within all the different parts of who I am, and honor my different interests, and be like, I'm an introvert, but there's also some part of me that has extroverted tendencies. Where those come from, I don't know, but I have to honor them, right? Or, yes, I'm super independent, but I also have to learn to ask for help, right? Or I'm super independent, but I can't say no to people, right? Like it's just I feel like the theme of my entire life will always be to honor all of my interests, all the different, if you were to look at my resume, you're like, I could see how they're all related, but like they're kind of, everything that I've done is pretty different, right? Or my style choices have just, sometimes I'll wear lots of color, other times I'll wear just all black, and I feel great in both of them. I feel, so I don't know if that answers your question, but I think being an introvert has allowed me this like it's allowed me to always sit with myself and do a lot of deep reflection about what I'm seeing, what I'm observing, not only in the world, but in myself. And I hate that we always have to say, oh, I like this. This is what I do. This is what I'm known for. It's like, it doesn't leave room for, if I love running, it doesn't leave a lot of room for, what if one day I want to pick up jump roping, right? Like I just, so I don't know if that answers your question fully, but it's, I think, honoring all the different parts of just everything, like not being like, oh, I only do this or I only like this. It's like, I'm this and like, yes, and right.
Like making space for duality, it sounds like, in every aspect.
Yeah. Because I think it's just, I think it's so important. I think a lot of why I often feel so many, when I don't know what to do is because I've said to myself, whether that's because of an external factor or myself, I'm like, this is the way that it needs to be, that it should be, instead of allowing myself to just flow with whatever is supposed to be, right? For me in particular. And I think that's oftentimes for me what causes this like tension between what I want and what I allow to happen. Going back to authenticity, right? Being like, this is the way it kind of should be, or the way that I've done it before. I've always said that I'm this. What if I shift now? Is that going to be me being like fake to me, like inauthentic to who I am? So it's just, there's room for everything all at once to exist.
I love that. Yeah, my whole thing is authenticity. So I love how you're saying like there's room for it all, and one side doesn't negate the other. And one thing that I think I've noticed though in the process of embracing duality, sometimes you can lean really hard on one side or the other. The one maybe for example, for me, I was very corporate, right? Like very by the book, very policy, all of that. And then what I did over the last few years was like lean all the way to the other side, quit corporate, intuitive, like creative, right? And now in every journey, I think like there's this moment of recalibrating, like, okay, let's meet in the middle. The other one wasn't bad. This one's not the best. Like it was needed like for me to feel that distance. But now I'm like, okay, like processes and all of that also have their purpose, Do you feel like you went through a moment of that, like one extreme to the other, and now like do you feel like you're finding your balance, or is that not the case?
Yes, I mean 100%. I think especially I went into the corporate world right out of college, and so I found myself being very like by the book. This needs to happen this way. Okay, I'm going to write this on my resume. I need to get this review from this person. Everything was really transactional, right? And that is outside of my essence. I am not that way. Like I remember sometimes why it physically felt so uncomfortable to do things, even things like public speaking or facilitating a meeting or a conversation, was because, again, I felt like I needed to be more transactional with people and not tap into the person and like the real, raw humanity of us, right? The corporate world sometimes can feel like it asks you to do that. And so I think as I navigated through my career, I became softer in that way. And what I mean is that is who I am and who I've always been in my life. But the corporate world felt like I needed to be a little bit more, all right, you did this. Okay, great. Have a meeting. What are we doing? Blah, blah, blah. Now it's like, how are you doing? Like, what's going on? Oh, okay, cool. Amazing background. That's a lame thing to point out, right? But like something like that, it's just bringing humanity back into it. And I feel like now I'm in a place too where, I went to go get my master's in business because I was like, there's no way that I'm in these rooms with people and there can't be a different approach to it, right? But I was like, but I can't propose it. I can't propose it because I know nothing about it. I mean, I know a lot because I've been in the industry, but I have to understand the foundations of what everybody else learned, the foundations and the language of the knowledge that everybody else has acquired, because only then will they take me seriously and saying, oh, okay, she knows what she's talking about.
I'm wondering, like, is that something that you've healed or like understood that maybe that's not necessarily the case? Like, you don't have to, like, your ideas are valid regardless, or do you
Yeah.
feel like you still feel that you
Oh,
need to?
no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
100%. I was like, oh, I knew what I was talking about all along. And then what it made me realize was that it wasn't necessarily that I needed more knowledge. It was that I just needed a different language, right? Like I needed to be able to speak their language and have them understand what I was saying. And not to the point of changing the way that I speak or changing the vocabulary words that I would typically use, but more so speaking to the things that they would care about. I believe in meeting people where they are, right? And so I would hope that someone extends the same grace to me often, right? But what I mean by that is if I feel like I have something additional to say or I have a quote better idea, right? It's not my job to convince you of the knowledge that I have or the idea that I have. It's really more so about meeting you where you are on that particular day. Like this is what I mean when I say bringing the humanity back to what feels very transactional, right? It's like maybe you're not in a headspace to listen to me right now, but then tomorrow you might be, right? So I find that tapping into that first, tapping into the human side of things first, always, I feel like I didn't start off that way because I felt like I couldn't. And
Yeah.
now I've gained a lot of confidence in my knowledge and confidence in what I know that now I can disregard that, not disregard it completely, but I don't have to worry so much about, oh my God, do I know this? Am I like, do I know what I'm talking about? I can just focus on the how, like how I communicate with people and how I connect with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think like as first gens, a lot of what we do is learning as we go, and we're kind of like observing, especially if you're an observer, right? Like you observe and then you're like, oh, this is what I need. Like I think we take in a lot because there's a lot of things that we have to learn on our own, right? And so like existing in a corporate space, I think like we see it. And I see it, I like what you're talking about. And I'm going to tie it to something that you talk about too. You talk about public speaking as an art. So I see that as art. Like when you're learning something creative, a new like hobby, first you observe and you replicate, right? So like, okay, these are the tools, this is how I use them, and then you start small, but you like follow directions, let's say. Then you start to get so comfortable with the tools and the art, whatever it is, that you start to create and embed like yourself into it, and like it comes from a different space. So that's what it's sounding like. Like now you own your own knowledge, your own expertise, and now you get to play, right? Now you get to kind of like mend both worlds.
Exactly. Yes. And actually one of the things that I've learned in the process and that I recommend to people now is oftentimes, to your point, you'll say, hey, go watch a couple of TED Talks or go watch a couple of people speak and pay attention to what they do and how they move across the stage and all those things, and try to implement that into your speaking. And over time, actually, like when I talk to people about public speaking, I was like, gosh, I wish that I didn't do that in the beginning. I wish that I kind of just went with what was most with who I was in my speaking at the time, got confident in that, and then went to go do research and look at people, right? Because I'm not only an overthinker, but I think we naturally will compare ourselves to people, right? And so if we say, hey, oh, wow, now I feel like I have to move like that. What does that do to the
Yeah.
essence of us as people and as speakers is starting with the comparison. We're going to do the comparison anyway, no matter what, really. But I think if we start with it, that's almost even more impactful than if we were to say, hey, let me just, I think I always tell people, just tell me, just go talk, like do your thing, right? And
Yeah.
then we go into the foundations of things because it's like, yeah, take this simple structure and remix it and make it your own, because now you know what making it your own feels like and sounds like. Like you're not trying to be like that. You're you already. You're just adding some best practices to it.
Yeah. That's the hard part. I think I'm like listening to you and I'm like, okay, so I'm not the only one. I think like it's like it was inevitable for us to do that, but thankfully like now we're reclaiming, I think like with anything new, you're trying to do it right, especially if you're a perfectionist and people pleasing, like you want to do it right. And so at least I like collected, like references and like just different things of like, how are other people doing it? But I totally get you. And I think like even let's say an artist, going back to art, like if someone is from the get-go not trusting their own like connection to whatever it is that they're trying to dabble into, who knows, they might have had such a different way to connecting with that it would have been like something so unique and like great and like new, right? But instead they maybe started off copying, and so it's like it's kind of like going backwards, like a U-turn to like, okay, now let's go back to who you are and how you want to connect with that thing.
Yeah, and like I'll even relate it back to like family dynamics, right? I am the oldest and I was the first to go to college. I got good grades all the time. I was your typical good student, right? And so my brother, while not, not knowledgeable, like he's smart, right? He just didn't do his homework, right? So therefore, because he didn't do his homework, he didn't get good grades. Like, and there was always this comparison of, Yvonne gets good grades. Oh, this, or my little sister, right? Oh, Yvonne went to this school. Like, I now that I know this about myself, and I know that my process for a lot of things, right? Because as first gen, you start doing things on your own. My process for everything pretty much that I did was, how did other people do it first? Let me go research and do that, and then see if I can figure it out from my point of view, right? But I'm like, how much more powerful and how much more quickly would I have landed on my own essence and my own power and confidence if I started with me first, right? If the first person that I looked for guidance or anything was me. And so I think even that comparison, right? Like if we know what it's like maybe to some capacity to be compared to maybe our siblings or the cousin that did this or does that, and we know that doesn't feel good. So like, why would we continue to do it to ourselves, right? And again, easier said than done, but I believe that.
Yeah. Ooh. Comparison is, I mean, it's beautiful though that you recognize it now. And I see that too, like with my sister. It's like they have their own beauty, they have their own like essence, and like unfortunately maybe even our parents were replicating, okay, what is a good parental figure, like, well, that your kids are doing good in school. So in a way they also fell in the same trap as we did,
100%.
Yeah.
It's cool to see the generations like changing though.
Yeah. I think, and I hope like it allows more people to flourish into who they were supposed to be from the beginning, right? Like instead of that being a reclaiming process and instead something like where they get to do that from a much younger age.
I see it in, you mentioned your younger sister, you said? My sister, there was one moment in particular where I realized like she's in a way different place than I was, and it's a better place, right? Like I was in her room. I was visiting from coming back from my place. I was visiting home. I was in her room because now when I'm home, I don't have a room, right? So I was in her room hanging out, and what did she do? I was in her room and she was like, "Hey, Yvonne, can you please get out of my room?" And I was like, no, like you can't tell me what to do. And she's like, please, she's like, I don't feel like talking right now. And I was like, my initial thought, like my thought process was like, who does she think she is right now? Like, you can't be closing no doors here, right? And I had to check myself and like put my ego aside and put what I had learned, the immediate response to that should be, and be like, okay, I'll be outside if you need me, right? And I remember thinking like, I don't want to be one of the reasons that she has to your point, reclaim her boundary or learn boundaries, right? And she's expressing a boundary to me right now. As annoyed as I may feel because I feel like it's a personal attack on me, it's not, right? And I need to respect it and honor it because I want her to know the difference in the rest of her life when someone is respecting her boundary and when they're not. And if at home I'm not, as her older sister, if I'm not allowing her to explore that part of her, like her setting that boundary, how am I going to expect that she'll do it later? And I'm like, shoot, I'm even struggling with it. I struggle with setting boundaries myself. So like that was a beautiful example of what should be and how I would hope someone would react to it. Right. And so I think that it's really beautiful to see the generations kind of shifting their thinking around it. Right. I think about only because it's, my mom, my sister, and then, myself and then my sister. It's kind of like 3 generations of what I consider to be just different. And every generation just gets a little bit better and a little bit more healed and awakened.
Yeah. Okay, that same scenario, can we like peel the layers a little bit for those that are listening to maybe like call out, like if they don't understand why, for one, it's important that you didn't allow your trigger to get the best of you. So let's say, for example, so she's expressing she doesn't want to talk. I think I see awareness there, right? What else what do you see in that, expressing that?
Knowing that it's not a good or a bad thing to not want to talk. Like to me, initially I almost felt offended because I was like, what do you mean you don't want to talk to me? Right. And it has nothing to do with me and everything to do with what she was feeling in the moment. So just really aware of her feelings, but also able to speak them out
express
loud.
It.
Yeah. And like feel comfortable enough to do it, or maybe not, who knows, but just doing it anyway.
Yeah. And then like on your end, I think like what we can say is, for example, you getting triggered by it or potentially offended could, in the like subconsciously or unconsciously, it could be that you remember that you were never allowed to say something like that. Let's say, right? Like there wasn't space for that for you. And so that's why it's triggering, like, how dare she, right? When I never got to, you know? And I think that unconsciousness sometimes happens with our parents or the people that we're trying to establish boundaries with. Like the way that they react to it isn't 100% about us. It's also about how they relate to what they're hearing. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to some extent, I always felt like her second mom. So because I had adopted this role of mother figure, for better, for worse, in her life, I was like, oh, hell no. Right? Because I thought that's how parents react, right? Like, we're not going to give you your personal space. Like, what do you mean? Right? And so I've even talked to her before because I've felt it very important for me to communicate to her. I feel like your mom sometimes, right? Like I've said that to her. I'm like, I feel like your mom sometimes, but I'm really not. So like, do what you want, right? Like I'm going to guide you in certain things, but like, I'm not your mom. And I've almost said that out loud to her just to reinforce it for me.
Yourself. As a reminder. So in your journey, what do you think is like the motor behind it? It seems like you've noticed different things, like you're very observant. Is that something that like drives where you feel like you need to work on next? Has it been therapy? Has it been books? Like what has been the underlying force behind your personal like healing or awakening?
Conversations. I've been to therapy a handful of times, but I can't say that I've given it my all. I've read a couple books, but I can't say that I've fully internalized them, right? I think it's sort of, I've gone to motivational speeches and I'm like, cool, I feel real inspired. And then I'm like, don't apply any of it. And so I think that a lot of my awakening, or like what I know to be true about myself, and how it's just I overanalyze things. And so that means I also overanalyze myself. And it's almost just like not only love for humanity, but conversations, right? So in my conversations with my friends, I feel like I watched my mom live a lot of things. And as an observer of those things, I made and drew my own conclusions. And whether that meant I observed them and internalized them as my own, or observed them and was like, I want to do things a little different, right? Or sometimes I feel like I've just been able to observe behavior and then kind of learning from other people, because again, I've always been pretty shy, reserved, so I don't share a lot about myself, but I see other people sharing stuff about themselves. So I think that a lot of what has played a role in the way that I see myself within the world is these conversations, right? Like having conversations with my people, having conversations with other people, hearing conversations between other people. I don't, it's been, again, I go back to the humanness of everything. Like I haven't read fully about it. I can't tell you, hey, this is exactly what's happening in my brain when this happens. I've been to therapy, but not enough to be able to say, this is exactly why I know why this is happening. It's just sort of, I understand that there's duality in a lot of things, and that the way that I am reacting to something, or the way that I've lived something, it always is tied to something else. Like everything is interconnected. And that, I think, is what centers me in understanding, okay, Yvonne, sit down with yourself. Like, where could this possibly be coming from, right? And then in the moment, then I'll go and do like research just to understand it. But I think, yeah, just conversations and people and my love for humanity.
So beautiful. And knowing that the theme is duality, what do you think has been the hardest, what aspect of duality has been the hardest to embrace?
Yeah, I think I will relate it back to being an introvert extrovert, right? In the workplace, I've always shown up a little bit more extroverted, because not only in the roles that I've been in, right? They've been more front facing, meaning I have led company-wide meetings. I'm on stages like talking to people, right? And so my job is quite literally to connect with people, understand them, so that I can better communicate with them, right? In internal communications. And that has made it so that folks see me as this like light of energy, this like huge person in the room, just talking to everybody, gets along with everybody, right? And it's been interesting because on the other end of things, right, that is me when I am very much in my like job mode. But then when I go and interact with people one-on-one, I just overthink it a lot more. I'm like a little bit more shy, and I tell people, I'm like, no, it's just, I'm a little bit more of an introvert. Like, you don't seem like it. You really don't seem like it. And I think hearing that has often made me think just about how I show up, again, right back to the authenticity piece. But when I think about existing as myself as an introvert, and then existing within the world of an extrovert, like those two things are still me, right? But it's been difficult to have other people accept that those two things can be me at the same time.
I see.
That's what's been really hard. That's what's been even harder for me, and what I think doesn't allow me to fully embrace both of those as being who I am.
Yeah.
It makes me feel like I have to keep them separate.
That's a reflection of what I think we're heading towards in the future. Like breaking out of the boxes, sometimes it's hard because people are trying to put you back in one or the other, right? And so even if you're embracing it and you're showing people, no, it can be both, and like I can actually sit here and tell you I'm an introvert, and that doesn't take away from what I do. When I'm speaking, people are like confused, like wait, no, and so I think that's part of like leading into the future. It's like breaking out of those boxes, and then also making it okay to not fit in one or the other, and holding space for people who can't fathom that, right? In the journey of that, it's kind of like it's okay, and you're kind of having to like walk them through the same journey maybe that you went through, right? Like that it doesn't have to be one or the other.
Yeah, it's like not only is it okay, but like most of us are like this, right? I feel like we like to, for the purposes of knowing things and being like, yep, checking things off, we like to see things as this one way, and then the definition that we get from that one particular moment is what we go and run with, right? But then when we look inwards and we're like, damn, I wish people knew this about me. I wish people knew that I also exist in this way. So it's like at the same time that I'm thinking, hey, can you see me for both of the things? That person is also wanting me to see them for both of the things, because I've also already probably made my own idea of who they are within the world and how they exist and walk in the world, right? So it's like, in those moments, calling that thing out and being like, yeah, I am. I am a little bit of an extrovert. I can be social, but really to my core, I'm an introvert, and that's cool. It doesn't mean anything. It just is what it is, right? Getting more comfortable with calling that out so that other people can feel comfortable and being like, oh, okay, so it does make sense that I love people and I love doing this and going on stages, but that I also am pretty reserved. Those two things make sense together. So I was like, we have to accept that they make sense together and say them out loud so that other people can also make sense of it together.
I think that's what's interesting about like accepting duality within yourself, but then understanding and being able to accept that from others too. You know, so yeah, understanding that others can also then be really happy and giggly one day and then not the next, right? And be okay with that and not make it about you.
Exactly. Or tell me to get out of the room, and I could be okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So in part 2, we're going to talk more about public speaking, how you came into that. And so maybe just to wrap up part 1, what is one of your favorite healing or mindful tools?
I don't know if running counts as one, but I find the entire process of running to be extremely healing, not only to my own body. It just like tunes me into what my body is actively doing and how I'm breathing while I'm running, but also just my surroundings, right? Like I experience things a lot deeper when I'm running.
Wow.
And at first it kind of started off as I'm training for this marathon thing. Like I have a goal to look for, but then it just became part of what I did and something that I really needed. And I didn't know, I was always athletic, but I didn't know that running long distance was actually what was going to bring me that much joy. And it just, one, cleared my mind, and it almost allowed me to talk to myself. Right? It's like, you know, when you're in your office space or anything else, you talk to yourself all throughout. If you don't, it's fine. I do it all the time.
Yeah.
But running, I don't listen to music when I run often. So it's just me and the sound of my breath and looking at people and the cars coming by. It just is it's a beautiful experience to know that I'm healing my body, having these internal conversations with myself, and that the world keeps going. Like people are walking by me, the cars are passing by, and it's just running in itself is just a beautiful reminder of that. And I think it's done a lot for my mental health, for my physical well-being, and for my heart in more ways than one.
I had never thought of it that way. Like, it feels like kind of like a trance, it sounds like, where like you get to get into like this mode. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and everything about it, like everything about it is, even sometimes when you don't feel like doing it, right? It's I always say that the things that I don't regret having done are like eating good food, traveling, and going on a run, right? Like it's always hard to get there. It's hard to say, okay, let me put my running shoes on, let me go out to the track and let me run. That part is hard, but once I get started and once I get into the movement of it, I never regret having done it. And I think that's a lot of what, you know, even journaling sometimes. I like to journal, and every time I journal, I'm like, that felt so good. Yeah. But it's hard to get to a point where I make it a habit, right? Running has almost been easy for me to pick up and make a habit. And I think that's why it's been so transformative for me.
Well, that leads to my next question. So it might be the same answer. A habit that you do for yourself every day.
Coffee. I'm just kidding.
Oh, okay.
Well, actually, it's so a lot of people will tell you in the running space, right? It's probably easier or better to get your run-ins in the morning, like really early in the morning, because it's almost perfect weather. The sun hasn't gone up. It's not peak hours. It's not terribly cold, depending on time of season. But something that I've learned about myself is that I wake up really early. So it's not a matter of I can't wake up to go running, but it's a matter of accepting that every single one of my mornings is going to be different, because I can't say that I have a morning routine. I'd be freaking lying to you if I said I wake up in the morning and then I grab my journal and journal. Like, that is not, I do it sometimes, right? Yeah. And it's beautiful when I do, but a lot of what my mornings consist of is me just going with the flow. And I think I need that at the very top of my morning and not saying, hey, I have to go on that run, or I have to go to the gym, or I have to start working on that email. So that's a habit that I've started to implement, is not having a habit in the morning and just going with the flow. Like, say, okay, I literally envision, let me wake up, it's quiet, put my robe on, go downstairs, make my coffee. If I know a lot of people will be against this, but like if I feel like scrolling on my phone, I'm going to scroll for a little bit while my coffee is being made. If I feel like picking up the book that I left off at, let me pick that up. Like, I just kind of go with whatever feels good to me in that moment. And that has been a really good habit, because the rest of my day is so structured. Like, the rest of my everything else is just work. So like, it's been nice to have a morning where I just go with the flow and not have a super strict morning routine, other than just do what feels good.
Oh, I love that. Slow mornings, essentially, like slow, intuitive. Yeah. Beautiful. Okay. What is a favorite song you listen to when you need to feel inspired?
Oh my gosh, so many. I have one that I always go back to, and it's I Was Here by Beyonce. I don't know if you've heard it, but I really love that song. And it's, when I was younger, I had a notebook where we would practice, you know, that S that everyone write with the little houses. You're like, you draw the three lines in the house, all that stuff, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So all of my pages had that, right? I was like, okay, why? What was that? Like, I would like to go back and understand, like, why even start writing that, first of all? It was
And why
everywhere.
do we only know one letter? S and O. That's the only two letters I knew.
Exactly. I was like, okay, it was literally all over. And I didn't know I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it stood for. I just knew everybody was doing it. So I was like, ooh, I want to learn how to do that. So it was everywhere. And then another thing that I would write was, I was here, like WUZ, here. And I would write when I was practicing writing on the whiteboard, because growing up I wanted to be a teacher, so I would practice writing on the whiteboard. It's like, I want my handwriting to be nice, so I would write I was here. Then I just started typing and, you know, pranking, quote unquote pranking my teachers, and putting I was here and then signing Yvonne on the little whiteboards, like a little small thing in the corner, just that they knew.
Creepy.
Right? Yeah. Like, what the heck? All of my notebooks right next to the S had like, oh, I was here type of thing. I don't know why I chose that phrase to practice my writing. But then I listened to Beyonce's I Was Here, and it was like a full circle moment for me, because that song just talks about, like, I was here and I made some type of impact, right? Like, you know, I had a good life and I made an impact. And I think that always just resonates with me, because at the end of the day, that's what it is for me. It's like, I want to know that I did something good. Like, in my time here, there was something that I did. And it doesn't even have to be attached to my name. Like, it doesn't have to be known as being me who did it. It's just like, I made the world just a little bit better by existing.
And so cool that you've been manifesting, or like, let's say, just calling it, you know, in since you were little.
Yeah.
That's exciting to see how that transforms, you know, as you go about your life.
Yeah, I don't think I haven't like thought about that in a while either.
Wow. Do you still do that at any point, or do you have it like in your wall or something?
I know I should write like I was here, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I find myself writing little things like on obviously, I think a lot of us do in our notebooks and stuff, and I will always practice like my signature. I don't know what it is about just having it written down, but I should like print that out somewhere.
Yeah. What is a favorite quote or advice that you refer back to?
I don't know the entirety of it, but it's I watched Coach Carter, so I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but the scene where they quote it's not our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who are we to be great? Actually, who are we not to be? I think that quote, I actually had that printed out on my planner for many, many years. And I think the reason for it, again, going back to the duality of existing as an introvert in an extroverted world, and being almost afraid, especially as a first gen, kind of in my lived situation, not wanting the spotlight to be on me, because I was like, I don't want people to know what's going on in my house, like all of that kind of stuff. It's like, for a lot of the time we dim our light and we're more scared of being in the spotlight and being known for our passions and for what we bring to the world than we are for existing within that dark space. And like, it's almost more comfortable to be a little bit, shy or more reserved than it is to own a lot of who we are and what we're capable of. So that quote I've always resonated with.
A feel-good or powerful book or movie that you like to watch?
I've always really liked Grease. It's really random, but it's also one of the only, growing up, my mom she had this box that she came home with. She used to be a janitor. She had this box that she came home with that they had given her, and one of those was a VHS version of Grease or something like that. So it was like the one movie that I watched all the time. So I don't even know if I like it that much as more like I was used to seeing it. But I always like going back to Grease. I know like every single word of it because I watched it. It was like the only movie we had at the house. So I watched that. That and Pinocchio.
Okay. Have you watched the new one? Like what is it called? Stop motion one?
Yes, I watched it. Yeah.
Did you like it?
It was good. I mean, I thought it was good. Probably also because of the ties I have with it from my childhood.
Yeah. And it was by a Mexican producer, director.
Yeah, it's Del Toro. Was it Del Toro?
Sí. Yeah. It was super cool. I loved learning about that.
Yeah.
And then my last question is, what is maybe advice or like for those fellow first gens who are listening, what message would you like to share with them?
Given that we're talking about duality, I think my message is to lean into those interests that are calling your name, even if it doesn't fit into your plan, even if you think that it's not what you're supposed to do, because that may actually be the thing that not only heals you, but also heals like generations and is probably also what could potentially make you be financially stable, right? Like there's so many ways to explore being quote unquote successful. So just allow yourself to lean into those things more often, even when they feel not right.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah. Be willing to jump out of whatever box you feel like you need to stay in and then see where that goes. Well, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your story with us today. And I'm so excited to see how it kind of ties into now what you do and how you're stepping into your own light. So those of you listening, make sure that you stick around for part 2. And other than that, First Gen, please share this with your amigas, amigos, amigues if you feel like they would find this helpful. Remember that I love me, I love you, and I can't wait for you to love yourself. Okay. Bye.
That's so cute. I love that.